Hey cousins, welcome to Brown Liquor and Bad Ideas.
Welcome, cousins, to this episode of Brown Liquor and Bad Ideas. I'm your cousin Cornell Wright, the People's Lobbyist. Today we're going to be talking about media and how the media can be used to your benefit to help you get a better understanding, a more comprehensive understanding of what's going on in our world. So, the reason I say media is I'm trying to focus on two particular brands of media. By the way, you may have noticed I have a little bandage, had a little carpal tunnel problem, and got it taken care of the other day. A number of you cousins know what it's like to have this problem, so I'll be back to normal not too distant future. But so let's go back to talking about the media. I'm talking about primary radio and television. I'm not going to talk about the media that comes through your social media, through your phone, or through your computer, because if you notice, that media is really kind of targeted, okay? By targeting, I mean that, the media, it comes to you, so if you go down looking at one thing, next thing you know, there's a number of other things you get along that same line, right? The same type of information. I'm sure you've been in that situation I've been, in which you look at something, you say, gee, I wanted to look last year. I was looking for a coat for my wife. I looked up one coat. Next thing you know, every time I was online looking for something, I got all these advertisements for coats along the side. Some of them the same coats I looked at, others were coats that were similar to along the way, so I eventually found one, so eventually after a period of time they went away. The same thing happens to us in regards to our information sources. If you have looking for information and you start looking at searches on your telephone or smartphone, or on your computer, you start getting those that are more targeted to you. That's because of the algorithms and the computer, the artificial intelligence behind all the major social media outlets that then target that information to you. What I'm suggesting now is not necessarily using those for the information we need regarding those things that are most critical and or perhaps most specific to what's concerning us today. The wildfires, the floods, the elections, the economy, the pandemic, the global world, the things that are going on around the world that have impact on us. All those things. You with me, cousins? Okay. So to that end, I suggest that let's start taking a look at the media sources. Let's go to radio and television, old school. Now, I know for a lot of the folks you're looking at radio and television, come on, cousin. Well, but let's think about it. That has been the benchmark as well as the base for information dissemination in our country for decades now, right? Radio being first and then along coming television. So let's go back to look at a little bit of old school in regards to getting some information, because those information sources are generalized, okay? They're not necessarily targeted for a particular piece of information based upon, I looked at this coat and I looked at that color, I looked at that fabric, and all of a sudden there's all these coats looking like that. You with me? But they are generalized in order to give you information as it relates to those particular ideas. Now, there may in fact be a leaning one way or the other from different information sources, but that's why I have a recommendation and a bad idea for you today. So what I'm suggesting is, and I've done this with a couple of my classes in the past, consumer behavior classes to be exact, is I asked the class, I said, look, let's take 1 week, 5 days. And in the course of 5 days, during the news hour, remember that old concept of the news hour, that's between 6 and 7 o'clock. That's not going any later, because now you're talking to people who are talking about news, but they're really talking heads like me, okay? They're opinion pieces. They're not necessarily the news. You got that, cousins? They're opinion pieces, not necessarily the news. They talk about the news, and they start giving you their opinions. Somewhat like I do, but I'm trying to give you the facts first, and then I'll tell you my opinion. So the key is, cousin, is go look at these outlets. I'm suggesting taking 5 days. So pick whichever order you want, but I suggest you look at these 5 different news outlets, and at the end of the week, I'm asking you to think and assess what you heard, what you understood, and what that relates to the history or the reality that you're seeing in your world. Because as the old expression goes, are you going to believe me or your lying eyes? You got that, cousins? You're going to believe me or your lying eyes. So the first one I want you to take a look at, in any order as I mentioned, so it's not necessarily in order. Pick an hour, 6 to 7 o'clock in the evening, for either ABC, CBS, or NBC. Any of the quote-unquote used to be big three networks. Those used to be the only source of information that anybody in the United States had, primarily, right? They were on the radio first, and they moved into television, and they still have a very basic, good understanding of the news. Also, for what it's worth, and you think about it, anyone, and if you ever decide, cousins, to learn another language, you go to your major news outlets of that country. That's where you learn to speak the best edition or approach to that language. Hint, whether you speak Spanish, whether you speak Chinese, whatever, go to the Chinese news stations because it's in the news that they're trying to be as clear as they can, using the correct, proper grammar, if you will, for that language, the best way to learn. Sidebar. So after you look at one of those three, pick it Monday, then take a look at PBS, Public Broadcasting System. They usually have an hour-long show between 6 and 7. They also talk about the news, all right? You'll start to see a little bit difference between those two. Then I would suggest a recommendation that you go watch an hour worth of Fox News at between 6 and 7 o'clock. They'll also give you a different perspective in regards to what they think is important, how they then look at everything, and then how they make assessments and what they decide to present to you, the cousins, all right? The other one is I want you to go online to the radio. This is old school, and I want you to listen to National Public Radio, okay? National Public Radio. They get a little bit of funding from the United States government. They get a lot of funding from people who support it. And I think you'll be interested to hear what they have to say because radio, as we all know, paints a picture in your mind of the stories. And between 6 and 7, I think you've got some good insight there. And the last, but certainly not least, is go look at the BBC, the British Broadcasting Corporation. Why the British Broadcasting Corporation? Well, cousins, I'll tell you. A number of years ago, I was with a group of young executives, people with MBAs from Harvard, MBAs from all sorts of different organizations. We were in technology at the time. We were doing a lot of good things. There was one of the guys who was there who's an engineer, and he was from Jamaica. So during the course of the conversation, we were all talking about things, and all of a sudden, the guy from Jamaica started bringing in points of information, points of facts that the other assembled people there had not heard before. And so I asked him, I said, well, what's the story? He says, well, first of all, I went to school in Jamaica, but then our educational system is based upon the British educational system. I then finished my graduate school work in Great Britain. So he said, I live on a small island. So we have to have a global perspective in what we look at for everything, because by 5th grade, we know everything about the history and the culture in the land of Jamaica. Make sense? So from then on, it was all about a global perspective. So my suggestion is, cousin, you go and look at those 5 outlets for media, television and radio, all right? You look at those 5, and I submit to you, you will have an opportunity very similar to that old story of suppose you have 5 blind persons and they were trying to describe an elephant, and everyone was located a different place around the elephant. Each one of them would give you a different perspective as to what an elephant is and how it's described, neither one of which would be totally accurate. You got me, cousins? So you need to figure out for yourself, I'm suggesting, this is the bad idea, is that what gives you the most comprehensive picture, i.e. the most accurate picture of what's going on in your world. Your world, my world. Because once we can start to be able to understand the same approaches to things, the same similar fact patterns, cousins, that's going to bring us closer together. And then we can start to decide what is your conclusion, what's my conclusion, and at the end of the day, we'll come up with a better recommendation and conclusion, what? For all of us, the cousins. All right? So once again, that bad idea is go look at the media outlets for 5 major organizations, ABC, CBS, NBC, one day, Fox the next day, National Public Radio the next day, BBC the next day, and National Public Radio. I mentioned them? Okay, fine. So that gives you 5 days. All my students had a chance to do that. They would come back to the class after the week and they'd say, wow, professor, that was something new and different. I have a new perspective on what I've been listening to and on what other information is out there that I should be listening to. You with me, cousins? All right, let's bring this thing together because separate is not a good place for us to be. Continue wearing your masks because we still need to do that. Drink responsibly. Don't drink when you drive. And you take care of yourselves, cousin, because we all care about each other, right? Have a good one.
Welcome to the show. Here we go again. Hey, cousins. Bring up cousins. I got some news to tell you.